Well, I love to sing with young people. I love to sing with young people when John Podine is leading us. The value of this event, and I'm not minimizing it at all, not just the fact that you get to sit and hear guys like Kyle and guys like Clark, the guys that were in my class today, Brandon, and the value is not just that, and I'm not minimizing that at all. You understand, when Elijah was in his lowest point, God told him, hey, I got 7,000 people that haven't worshiped Baal. There's half that number right here in this room. You've got physical proof that you're not the only Christian out there. You've got physical proof that you're not the only person who believes in the Creator God. The value of an event like this, my brother went to Faulkner University. One of the hardest days of my life was when he left home. He's my mentor. I look up to him. He's my friend. He's one of my biggest fans. It means a lot to me that he's proud of me. When he drove that old Monte Carlo off toward Montgomery and left me standing there on the roadside, I rode out with him till he made that left turn, and then I ran back to the house. I ended up going to Harding, 8 hours away from home, 10 hours away from Montgomery. He sent me a card. He said, there is a destiny that makes us brothers. And because of who we are and who we've chosen to be, we can't ever live close together. Christians spread out. The value of something like this is that Christianity is not supposed to be self-contained. We don't often get a chance to be all together. That's why church is so important. You come together a couple of times a week to re-energize and fellowship and encourage, and then you spread out to the schools and to the teams and to the jobs and to the places you go. And the value of something like this is you get to come back together and you get to re-energize and you get to reunite. I get to see people I've loved a long, long time, but get to see very, very little of. I get to spend a couple of days with people that are my brothers, not just in Christ, but in mission. My niece and my nephew are here. I don't get to see them very much at all. In fact, I usually get to see them more at speaking engagements than I do any other time. Now, my nephew is Braxton Jones. They call him Brack. He would be embarrassed if I were to tell you he's looking for a girlfriend. He's available. But I'm not going to tell you that because it would embarrass him. I'm just letting you know that if you knew that about him, it would embarrass him, okay? My niece is also here. She's beautiful. If you talk to her, you need to be 6 feet away. I can make that shot if you're closer. It'll just get blood on her. But if you see her, 6 feet away is what I like to think about. There's a young man here. I think his last name is Reinhardt. I'm trying to remember his first name here. Let's see, I think it's Carter Reinhardt. Carter is from Batesville, Mississippi. He moved from Batesville to here, and he's at Exposure with his youth group from Mississippi. That's the value of an event like this, to reconnect people. Carter's mom teaches school with my wife. They're school buddies at Grissom High School, and she said, you need to point out that Carter's here with his old youth group, and his Christianity and his mission in life has brought him to Huntsville. That's the value of an event like this. And so don't minimize the spiritual part, but also understand the value of you making lifelong spiritual connections, because it's not very often that Christians are called together. We're supposed to spread out and spread the word. Let's talk about value and other things tonight too. If you have your Bibles, look at Luke 15. Then all the tax collectors and sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. And so he spoke this parable to them. You have Jesus surrounded by people. And the people that he's surrounded by, there's an outer layer of people who are standing back and evaluating, or they're standing back and they're judging, and they see the people that Jesus is with, And they say, these people don't have any value. These people are no good. These people are worthless. They look at this crowd that has surrounded Jesus, and they judge them. In fact, they call them tax collectors and sinners. A tax collector in the first century was somebody who was of Jewish nationality, who was working for the Roman government to extract taxes from his fellow countrymen. Sometimes they were unethical, sometimes they weren't, but they were despised. They were considered as treasonous, they were considered as unethical, they were considered as traitors. And so they had not just sinners, but sinners, and then a special category for sinners, tax collectors. I could probably wrap my mind around that, calling a tax collector a special kind of sinner. I don't know how you feel about April 15th, but I could see that. If I were going to make my list, it would be tax collectors, sinners, and physical therapists. Now, if you're a physical therapist, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I've had 10 surgeries in 10 years. And when you have surgery, a physical therapist is usually about this tall. She's blonde. She weighs about 87 pounds holding a bowling ball full of mercury. And she acts like she would be a kindergarten teacher. And she walks in the room and goes, "So, Mr. Jones, you've had shoulder surgery. Let's do 1,000,000 push-ups. That'll be delightful, won't it?" And they just torture you. And so if I were going to, that'd be tax collectors, sinners, and physical therapists. They've surrounded Jesus, and these people go, he's touching tax collectors. He's eating with sinners. These people have no value. And in response to that thought, Jesus is going to tell some stories. Now, it's interesting that when you look at that scripture, a lot of times we've let translators and people who've organized our Bibles chop them up into chapters and verses and put subheadings. And please try to read your Bible as a macro, and don't just look at the micro. Especially, we do it because we're preachers and we only have 30 or 40 minutes, and so we chop things up. But it's really important to understand that this story, once Jesus starts talking, he doesn't interrupt his discourse. This is not the same story told 3 times. This is 3 stories that build upon each other to make a point. When I was a little boy, I thought, okay, same song, second verse, different people representing the same thing. That's not what's happening here. Jesus is responding to these people who look at the sinners and the tax collectors, and they say, these people have no value. And in direct response to that attitude, Jesus says these things. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which was lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. Or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I found the piece which I lost." Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and journeyed to a far country, and there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. And when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land. He began to be in want. And then he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And he arose and he came to his father, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robes and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older brother was in the field. And when he came, he drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. And he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you and never transgressed your commandment any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots and killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive, and he was lost and is found. See, when these people respond and they look at Jesus and he's surrounded by these people that they deem as valueless, these people aren't important, they don't have any value, Jesus, understanding their hearts, says, let me ask you a question. And please understand, this is not Jesus teaching. This is how you should respond to lost sheep. This is not an instruction manual for dealing with lost sheep. This is a value check. Which one of you, if you had this many sheep and you did your head count and you missed one, wouldn't leave 99 sheep to go find one sheep? Why would you behave this way? That's the value you place on an animal. He wants them to understand that he understands their value system. You ever seen a sign on a post, lost dog? You ever seen a post on Facebook, we're missing this animal? Ask the guys in this audience who are deer hunters what it's like to wound a deer with an arrow and spend a day and a half or 2 days following a blood trail on your hands and knees in mud and water in a lightning storm trying to find a lost animal. Gerald and I, that's my brother, were hunting one time and we came home. I don't know why we came home early, but it was early enough you could still see. And as we passed by this little church on Gurley Pike, I saw something move under a church building. And I had a suspicion what was under there. So we went to the house, got a can of tuna, came back to the church, the abandoned church building, opened this little can of tuna, and out came these little kittens. And I grabbed a little calico colored cat and took it to the house, much to the delight of my daughter, much to the unhappiness of my wife. We had adopted a cat. She named him Oxford. We built him a little place there to stay in. We got up the next morning before daylight. We're hunting. Just a little bit after 8 o'clock, I'm sitting in a tree looking out over the woods. My phone wiggles in my pocket. My family knows that if I'm in the woods, something better be on fire or somebody better be bleeding. Don't call me. But they call me, so I pull my phone out. What? Dad, there's a sign at the end of our road. It says, lost kitten, reward $500. What should I do? I said, go catch all of the kittens. But there's a lady that lives down the road from us, and she has a daughter, and the daughter is eccentric in some ways, and she had found these abandoned cats. Well, rather than taking the cats home and getting them shots and registering them, she was just going down every day across the pasture and feeding these cats. And she got down here this morning and counted, and she was missing one, and the value of a stray cat was such that she put a sign up that said, I'll pay you $500 for this kitten. Jesus says, which one of you, it's a rhetorical question, if you had a lost animal, you'd go to all kind of trouble to find that animal. Or ladies, you get out your hope chest and you've got this little box and you open it up and you've got these trinkets in it that you're going to wear as a garland on your wrist the day you get married. Have you ever noticed that girls plan their weddings before they're allowed to date? You know, Lonnie Beth had this thing that, hey, we're going to do this. And I said, what are you going to do? Just make some poor guy plug in there? She said, oh, yeah. And that's what happened to poor Tyler. He just kind of stood there and the thing happened to him. But she opens this case and she's got these 10 pieces of silver. And she's going to take those silvers and going to make her a garland for her wrist. And when she's presented to her husband, she's going to have this decoration on her wrist. And she gets out her 10 silver pieces, 1 and 2 and 3, and she's missing one. And she takes the house apart. She lights a lamp and she sweeps it. This is not a house with hardwood floors. This is not a house with carpet. This is a dirt floor house. And she's sweeping the dirt to try to find something that's buried in the dust. Jesus said, this is the value you place on an animal, and this is the value you place on an object. When I was younger and discovering the truths in this chapter, I pretended to sneeze. I didn't have to wear reading glasses in those days. I was up in front of a congregation. I pretended to sneeze and said, hey guys, I've blown out of contact. Can somebody help me? And on a Sunday morning, men in their suits got on their knees and were looking for a contact lens. I saw a state basketball championship shut down when a player told a referee, hey, I blew a contact. You know how valuable a little piece of glass that you put in your eye is? What would happen in this audience if somebody were to suddenly discover, hey, I've lost my cell phone? Call the FBI. One girl just grabbed her heart. It's hypothetical. You didn't really lose it. What happens at your house when dad loses the remote? Oh, yeah. That hit a little bit close to home. Dad starts looking for that remote. You know, Dad, you could get up, take 4 steps, change the channel, and sit right back down. But no, Dad's going to walk to Kilimanjaro and back looking for that remote. And at some point, Dad will declare, someone has stolen the remote. Yeah, they snuck in the open window in the cover of darkness. Ignored the laptop, ignored the iPad, left the plasma TV on the wall, took a $9 remote, and out into darkness they went. Come on. That's the value you place on stuff. Jesus is eating with these people, and these religious people, these spiritual people, these children of God go, they don't have any value. And Jesus says, let's talk about value. What's the value you place on an animal? What's the value you place on an object? What's the value you place on a ball game? What's the value you place on an automobile? What's the value you place on a status symbol? So he asked 2 questions. Which man of you with 100 sheep, which woman of you with 10 pieces of silver? And then he makes an emphatic statement. There was a man that had 2 sons. One of the sons was a reprobate. He was arrogant. He was selfish. He was haughty. He was egocentric. And he said, Dad, and in their culture, it was usually acceptable for a younger son to cash out and go away because he's not going to inherit as much as the older brother does. But in our culture, it sounds like, I wish you were dead, give me the will. And he takes his father's money and he goes away and he ruins his life. Now Jesus doesn't pull any punches. This kid has done probably what you can imagine that he's done. He drank and he smoked and he partied and he slept with harlots. At least that's what his brother accuses him of. And he ends up in a place where he's living in a pen with animals he considers to be unclean, and he's wishing he could eat the things the unclean animals would eat. That's a special kind of nasty. I mean, he's in a place where no Jewish boy would ever find himself. He's living with pigs and would eat the things the pigs are eating if they let him. And then he has this epiphany. He comes to himself. And he realizes that my dad's employees are better blessed than I am. And I'll go home and be a hired servant. I'll go home and be an employee of my dad and be better off than I am here. So he gets up and he goes home. The real emphasis of this story is really not the father. The father is a collateral point. The emphasis of this story is Jesus says, this is the value you place on an animal. You got 100 sheep, you miss one, you'll leave the 99, you'll go through the wilderness and you'll look for it. We've even written a church song about it. Jesus is not teaching, that's how you look for lost sheep. He said, this is how you behave on things that are important to you. This is how you behave if you have a piece of silver or a cell phone or a contact lens and you lose it. This is how you act. You'll take the house apart. This older brother represents you, because when your lost brother comes home, you are mad and jealous and arrogant and resentful. You present yourself to the fathers. I've never sinned against you in any. Really? Where did we get to the place where we tell God we've never left his side? Where do we get to the place where we think God has stepchildren and then special children? I asked one time, I was in Cloverdale, Indiana, I said, who was unhappy when the prodigal son came home? A little blonde-haired girl about the 6th row said, the fatted calf. Okay, besides him. This brother is a contrast and a comparison. When Jesus tells this story, he wants him to get this point. This is the value you place on an animal. This is the value you place on a thing. And this older brother represents the value you place on lost people. And you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be humiliated and you should be humbled. Because the value that you place on lost things is not the same value your father places on them. And because your value is not the same as your father, you and your father are at odds. You notice this boy doesn't come into the house. The father runs to meet one lost son, and then the father goes outside the house to talk to another lost son. Because although that boy's at the house, he's really not home. Because he doesn't share the father's values. That's what Jesus is really teaching here in Luke 15. Because Jesus is confronting these people in what I call a didactic triad. He tells 3 stories. They build on each other. It's not the same stories told 3 times, but he tells these 3 stories and they build to a hammer blow. This is the value you place on an animal. This is the value you place on a thing. And look at the value you place on a lost person. You should be ashamed of yourself. And when he tells this story, it resonates and it echoes in their minds that they are different than their father. But because he told this story and because he confronted their values, we get an insight into the Father. The Son is guilty. The Son is petulant. The Son is selfish. The Son is arrogant. The Son is sinful. He's a partier, he's a drinker, he's a smoker, he's a fornicator. And he decides, I'm going to come home. And when he comes home, his father is sitting looking for him. And when he sees the son coming down the road, his father runs to meet him. Jewish men didn't run. God told Moses, when you build an altar to me, you don't approach that altar with steps. You build a ramp, lest the nakedness of your priest become uncovered. And the Jewish men took that very, very seriously. They often took things that God said and kind of ran to the extreme with them. God said, you don't use my name in vain. I've got a very close friend. He's a tactical medic with our SWAT team. His name is Rich Colvin. Rich is a practicing Jew. He wears a yarmulke underneath his tack helmet. I made shirts for the team several years ago with a drawing of a fist and a guy rappelling off the fist, and it says, God is my rock, Psalm 144:1. I told Rich, I said, I know you don't celebrate Christmas. I'm making these shirts for the guys. Would you accept one just as a gift from me? It has nothing to do with Christmas. I said, it's even got an Old Testament verse on it. Rich said, I'd be glad to, but I can't wear a shirt with the name on it. He said, if I have God's name on my shirt and I tear it, or I get it dirty, or I get ketchup on it, I've disfigured God's name. I can't treat God's name as valueless. So I appreciate your friendship, but I'll have to pass on the shirt. And that's not really what God meant when he said, don't use my name in vain, but that's the way they interpreted it. So when God told Moses, hey, you don't uncover the nakedness of your priest, he wanted people not to cut up in church. He wanted there not to be any awkwardness. But the Jewish men didn't uncover their lower legs. So when a Jewish man had to run, he had to pull up his robe and run. Jewish men did not run in public. And when you see a Jewish man in the New Testament running in public, he's broken social protocol. It's important to him on some level to get to Jesus. Jesus illustrates his Father as pulling up his robe, violating social protocol, and running to meet this lost boy. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. And I don't know how we could change it. And I don't know how we should change it. But when people come down an aisle at the end of a church service, and they walk really slow, and they walk really sad, and the preacher puts on that stern face, the father ran toward that kid. The father really didn't let him finish his confession. The father didn't go home and read a card. Now your brother has come home and he's written this. The father says, bring me a robe, bring me a ring, bring me shoes. Those are 3 signs of sonship. Slaves didn't wear shirts, sons do. Slaves didn't wear shoes, sons do. Slaves don't have access to a signet ring that you can sign the checkbook with, and sons do. The picture that Jesus gives of the Father is when the lost thing comes home. Number 1, the Father's looking for the lost. Number 2, the Father runs to meet the lost. And when the Father gets to the lost, he already knows you're lost. You don't have to tell him everything. He says, I want you to know that you're a son. Father, I want you to know I know you've sinned. But what I want you to know, what I want you to know is you're a son, a ring, a robe, and shoes. And when the lost person comes home, instead of it being something where people sit on the floor and they cry with one another, there's a party. There's music, there's dancing, there's a feast, there's a celebration. And the picture that Jesus gives of the Father is, this is how the Father values lost people. And it doesn't matter where you've been, and it doesn't matter what you've done. If you say, I'm going to come home to the Father will run to meet you. Now, I like the fact that we confess our faults and pray one for another. I like the fact that sometimes we're bold enough to say, hey, I'm guilty of this, and I want to own it publicly. But you know, before you ever make that confession, if you've asked the Father to forgive you, he's met you and you're forgiven. The Father loves lost things. And the Father is waiting for the lost things to come home. And when the Father sees you coming home, instead of it being some somber occasion, the Father throws a celebration. And you've got to understand that the picture Jesus was giving us of his Father is that the Father celebrates when you come home. It's not where you come in and you say, Father, I've done this, and you get a lecture. It's not this thing where you come home and say, Father, I failed. He goes, yeah, I know you're a failure. It's when you come home and say, Father, I have been wrong. The Father says, I've been waiting for you to discover that and come back to me because I want to make it right. And there's music and dancing and feasting and a celebration. And it doesn't really matter what the other people in the church think about you, you're still welcome at home. God doesn't have stepchildren. God doesn't have tier 1 and tier 2 children. God doesn't have closer relationships with certain people. And it's when you decide that you've come home, it doesn't matter where you've been, it doesn't matter what you've done. When you take your step toward God, God runs to meet you. It's not that God matches your pace. God outruns you when you aim yourself toward him. And the genius of Jesus is that he said, I want you to look at this comparison. I want you to look at the value that these people put on things and these people put on animals. And I want you to look at the value these people put on lost people. But I want you to understand the value that my Father puts on the lost. Now that gives us 2 missions. Mission number 1 is, if you're not currently a lost person, you've got to start looking for the lost. And they've got to become more valuable to you than your animals and your possessions and your cars and your teams and your degrees and your scholarship and your stuff. If you're lucky enough to have been safe at home all this time, then if your value system toward the lost is not the same as your father's value system toward the lost, then you and your father are at disagreement with each other. You're at odds and you're in opposition, and that needs to change. So instead of sitting here and saying, you know, we came to exposure and this kid and this kid and this kid didn't, I can get my phone out and say, hey, I wish you'd been there. We missed you. We love you. And rather than looking at people and saying, hey, and we know what you're guilty of, ask them, do they know how much the Father loves them? And if you're a son who's still at home, Jesus says your value system toward the lost has to be the same as your father's value system, and your impetus and your priority in life needs to be dealing with the lost people and trying to get them to come home. And when they make an effort to come home, instead of it being some sad, somber thing, it needs to be a celebration. And we rejoice with the people who come home, because that's what the angels in heaven are doing. The second thing is that if you're a lost person, it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've not done. The Father says, if you will change, if you will go from where you are to where I am, if you will come to me, I will come to you, and we can be reunited. That's what the gospel message of reconciliation is about. It's to restore a broken relationship. I saw a guy do this. I don't want to put my Bible on the floor, but I have no other choice. I saw a guy do this. It's not original with me, but I wanted to share it with you. This is a $100 bill. I brought it for this occasion. I don't usually just walk around with Benjamin in my pocket, but this is a $100 bill. Theoretically, let's say that I were willing to give it away. Is there anyone in the audience who would take possession of this $100 bill? Okay, okay. Suppose I told you that all United States currency, at least in the $100 bill denomination, had trace amounts of cocaine on them because it is prolific in the drug trade. This $100 bill has a 99% chance of having trace amounts of cocaine on it. Would you still want this $100 bill? I still have a couple of people who, yes, I'll take that $100 bill. Suppose I told you that this $100 bill had actually been used in sex trafficking, that had bought and sold people. Would you still be interested in this $100 bill? I got one guy still in. He said, oh yes, I'll take your $100 bill. Suppose I tore the corner off of it, spit on it, crumpled it up, and ground it under my foot in the dirt and the mud. Would you still be interested in this $100 bill? I still got a guy who's in. Oh yes. You know why? Because you see, on the back of this $100 bill, it says United States Treasury. See, it doesn't matter what's been done to this bill. It doesn't matter what's been done with this bill. There's an image on the back. There's a stamp that says Treasury of the United States. There's a mark on it that says there's an authority higher than you and stronger than you that gives you value. This has value of $100, regardless of what has been done, regardless of what's been done to it, and regardless of what's been done with it, it still has value. And if you're a lost person, I don't care what you've done. If you're a damaged person, I don't care what's been done to you. I don't care what's been done with you. You have a mark on you. You have a stamp on you. You're molded in the image of God. And God says you have value. The value you have is more valuable than an animal. The value you have is more valuable than a possession. The value you have is more valuable than your past, because you have my image, and my son's blood was shed for you. And I don't care where you've been. I don't care how far away it is. And I don't care how long you've been gone. there is value to you that I place in you because I'm your father and my stamp is on you. And if you'll step toward me, I'll run to you. That's all you got to decide is which one of those two people you are tonight. You're either a person who needs to redo your values and say, I'm going to start looking for the lost people that my Father is looking for, and I'm going to run to them and run with them back to God if I can. Or you've got to decide, hey, I'm one of those people, and I've been gone. I've been gone far away. I've been gone a long time, and I'm going to come home. And when you come home, it doesn't have to be sad. It doesn't have to be slow. It doesn't have to be shameful. When you step into this aisle, your Father has already run to meet you. And there's a celebration. If you're lost tonight, the value that God places on you is, I don't care where you've gone, I don't care what you've done, I don't care what's been done to you. If you step out, I'll run to you. Step out right now while we stand, while we sing.